Welcome to this segment of Understanding Your Bluebook. Today we're going to talk about Rule 1.2 and 1.3 of your Bluebook, both of which have to deal with introductory signals and how to arrange them. Rule 1.2 looks at how to use signals, when to use them, and how they should be arranged. Rule 1.2 actually lays out the signal in the order in which they should be placed within a string cite and the citation clause in your text. So if you follow the order set out in 1.2, then you'll be in compliance with Rule 1.3, which we'll talk about more in a moment. First, let's talk about introductory signals and when to use them, when not to use them. The first part of 1.2 addresses a situation where you would not use an introductory signal, and there are actually three such situations. The first is when you're directly quoting the authority. The second is when you're directly stating a proposition from the authority. Usually that's going to be statistics or numbers of some kind, because it's clear that those things have directly come out of the authority. There's no additional step in understanding that the reader needs to make. And the final time when you would not use a signal is when you've referred to the authority in the text and you're now pointing to the reader where you got that information from. An example of that would be Bob Miller made the assertion that St. Mary's is the best law school in the nation. You wouldn't need to include any kind of signal. You would just give the reader the citation on where it was that Bob Miller actually said those things. The next most common type of signal that you will use is a C signal. Now, C is when you paraphrase information, basically, and the reader is going to have to go through just a few more steps within their mind till they understand how you use that information to support your assertion. It's clearly in support of it. You wouldn't use a C signal if it barely supported it, or it's maybe relevant but not completely relevant. C is going to be clearly supporting the assertion that you're making, but the reader just needs to think a little bit more about why you used it. The next most common signal is C also. That's also a supportive signal, and that's generally when you want to give the reader more information in addition to the source that you pointed them to on where you got your material. This tells them that there are all these other articles or information pieces out there that support the assertion that you're making. In law, that's an important aspect of how you make an argument, because you don't want to be the one making a novel argument. It's always a better position for you to be in when you have as many sources as possible supporting what you're trying to say. There are also signals that provide a useful comparison. So when you want to tell somebody, this author said this, but compare it with what this author said. You might have slight differences, and maybe that they support each other, but they're saying it in a different way. Another common signal is going to be a C generally signal. That signal is to provide background material. So, for instance, if you were writing a paper on Mexico and you wanted the reader to get a little bit more information about the country so they could understand how the legal system developed the way it did, but that would weigh down your text, then you would give them a C generally signal and point them to some background information about the country. Then you move into your signals that indicate contradiction. Now you're probably asking yourself, why would you want to indicate any kind of contradiction to your argument? Well, in the law, it's important to point out that there are contradictory arguments, and it gives your paper a little bit more credibility, that you've done all the research, you've looked at all the sides, you're not afraid to provide your reader with the other side, but you still feel like ultimately you have come to the right conclusion based on the research that you've done. Some of those signals are contra, but C, but CF. You would use those again to indicate contradiction. So let's move into Rule 1.3. Rule 1.3 deals with how to arrange those signals. And as I mentioned previously, 1.3 basically says that you look at 1.2 and you follow the order that they're arranged in. The first citation you would always provide is one that uses no signal at all, because that's directly going to the assertion that you've made. From there, you would use signals that positively support your assertion, then signals that maybe compare things from your assertion, signals that indicate disagreement with your assertion, and then finally signals that provide background information for your assertion. The other thing that Rule 1.3 says is that when you are providing a string cite, and a string cite is a series of citations strung together with a semicolon, you need to separate citations with different signals by a period. So, for instance, that's going to look like if you have a C cite you're going to use a C and then put all of the articles that belong with your C introductory signal separated by semicolons. When you end those articles, you put a period, and then you would do C also and string all C also articles together with a semicolon, then put a period, and then move into any other signals that you might use. So signals that indicate something different about the assertion that you're making should be separated by a period. Kind of like in a sentence, when you're making a separate point, you end your sentence with a period and you move into another sentence to make a new point. You don't want to string something together that's going to end up being a run-on sentence, just like you don't want to string something together that's going to end up being a run-on citation. It needs to be clear how you're using the authorities that you're providing. And the final thing that I want to say about signals, Rule 1.4 deals with how to properly arrange authorities. So whether that's a case that you're citing to, whether it's a constitution, whether it's a book, there's a proper way in which you arrange that in each string cite. We'll get to that in another time because that's a complicated section, but it's important to provide your reader with information in the form of an explanatory parenthetical for any signal that you provide. And sometimes even when you don't provide a signal, it's just always going to be more helpful to the reader to understand, why did you use this source? What does it say about the argument that you're making? And it lends a little bit more credibility to your argument in that you've explained that there's a purpose behind the sources that you've used. So that concludes our discussion about Bluebook Rule 1.2 and 1.3. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you back soon.